Coordinator at NELTA, and I'd like to welcome you all in this fourth episode of Stay at Home, Continue to Learn webinar series. And the webinar today is entitled on Educational Planning During Crisis Situation. Now, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Our first presenter is Dr. Hari Prasad Lamsal. Mr. Hari Prasad Lamsal, PhD, is a Joint Secretary of Government of Nepal. Currently, he is working in the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. Mr. Lamsal has completed his master degree from University of Leeds, MPhil from Tribhuvan University, and PhD from Kathmandu University in education discipline. He has worked more than 27 years in education sector under different capacities, ranging from secondary school head teachers, school supervisor, district education officer to senior management position in the Ministry of Education. He has been actively working in educational planning and resource development sector in this pandemic. We have another presenter, and she is Psyche Kenneth. Psyche Kenneth is an international consultant who works on education and local governance, specializing in reforming curriculum, textbook, teacher education, exam system, and school management for basic education at local level. Psyche has worked across South Asia and Southeast Asia. She is now assisting Kawasati municipality through the British Council to develop a crisis-sensitive education management plan. Before handing over the floor to our presenters, I'd like to inform all the participants that if you have any questions related to the today's topic, you can write them in the chat box during the presentation. I'd like to request Mr. Sudeep Neupane, Access Coordinator at NELTA, to write down the questions which we will take at the Q&A session. Now over to you, Harisa.
Thank you, Vikas ji. Madam Motikala, who is leading the NELTA organization, sorry, I forgot to name colleagues from British Council and NELTA colleagues who are on board, and Psyche, who is a presenter as well, who brings the international experiences in the given topic, and dear colleagues, participants from different parts of the country. First of all, I would like to thanks to NELTA for interesting me in such important event, which is Stay at Home, Continue to Learn webinar series. We are two, and we will be talking about an hour. We will try to limit, and then we will be responding responses, concerns of the colleagues. Because of time limit and other platform, I request colleagues to mention the questions or concerns or experience in the chat box. So that will be useful for organizer as well as for us to respond later on. Vikas has already welcomed you all, and I would also like to reiterate it. House rule, Vikas has already talked. I don't think so. I need to repeat again. Anyway, you will see in the screen, you will get the presentation slides, of course, later on, and you will be muted, and you can put your questions and concern in the chat box. Sorry to say that, because we will not have two-way communication during the presentation time. Later on, we will try to respond to you. I mean, I'm not here as an expert. I'm here to share the experiences with you, and probably I can also learn many more things from your responses, which will be reflected in the chat box. So these are the housekeeping rules. I mean, we all know and we will follow it. The topics for today's discussion is about educational planning during the crisis situation. That will include both educational planning outside the school. I mean, education. How can we develop education? How can we resume education during the crisis or even after the crisis period? Then in the meantime, we'll be also talking about the instructional plan which will be carried out within the school premises, within the class as well. So my request is I will be talking about the education planning, and another presenter who has plenty of international experiences, she will be talking about the basically instructional things relating with teachers, children, curriculum, and all these things. The objectives of this webinar for today is if we know all some of the best strategies which are relevant for the crisis situation, then I will also share some of the best ways of planning when we back to the normality. And then I will also share some success stories. I know that you all have many more stories. You can mention it in the chat box. Then what we have learned, sorry to say that the first thing we learn in Nepal is education is further pushed. If we talk about the priority, the COVID, the priority is a little bit shifted, although we have not said officially, but the first thing is safety, then vaccine, then food, then only education comes under the in the priority, and that affects largely. We are talking only about the access. No, it affects the quality, equity, and management. We are not talking about how the pandemic have affected the poorer people. I mean, those people which are named under the disadvantaged categories. And we also learn what my experience is that if we engage students in learning, it will create some sort of normality, normal situation. I mean, during the pandemic, it's very difficult for us to be locked in the room. But if we engage ourselves with student learning, then that will be helpful to deviate us from the stress to the engagement. And we also learned that the normal curriculum or normal strategy or normal module cannot work during the pandemic. We need a flexible as well as integrated learning module. Then what we learn, we are faced experiences. We do not have data. We are talking in an average manner. We are talking about we are developing our ideas based on the social media, headings or some news. Assessment on the how the crisis is prevalent in education system, how education is being affected by the crisis, as well as how education can impact on the crisis. Both sides we do not have. The first one, we need the data. The second part, we need international experiences. So the prevention, preparedness, and mitigation. The cycle, the ladder is like that. We first need a prevention measure, then a preparedness measure, then mitigation measure. Sometimes we learn that communication, delivering the right message at the right time is necessary. There are so many rumors, maybe fake news, and that is aiding us to move towards the stress. So the most important thing is that, like in Nepal, how can we establish the contact between the teacher and student, and how can we carry out the students' learning. And then, of course, this is a crisis, is an unwanted event, and we all should work together. This is not only government, this is not only non-government, this is the parents and government and non-state actors. They all should work. These are the some of the learnings which I have gained. This is my own experience during this COVID-19 and earthquake 2015. Some of the experiences I have drawn from the 2015 earthquake, and most of the experiences are from this COVID pandemic. This is a slide figure. You can see how the schools are closed. There is one report which shows that the pandemic, the effect is in order to prevent the spread of virus, and the best way is to lock down. And schools are the first target in the process of lockdown. So schools are affected. Once schools are closed, and we thought that everything will be closed. Gradually, we move towards the contacting students. Although, we do not have the connectivity and other devices that made us difficult to contact the to establish the connection with the students. But lockdown does not mean that stop learning. But we can have different strategies, different alternative ways to engage students. Gradually, we learn it, and later on, students and teachers have made some sort of contact, and some learning is going on. Teaching learning activities is going on. The next one is about the question is that what we have done is enough. No. There is a gloomy picture. Some of there are connectivities, and teachers have devices, students have devices, parents can afford, and they have established connection between teacher and students. And in many more cases, no, we have developed the guidelines, but this is not blaming to anybody, but most of us, those who are working in education sector, we thought that these are for others. Guideline is for, if we see the guidelines for alternative learning strategies, every schools can categorize themselves under the 5 different groups. The one who does not have any facilities, and the second one could have the radio, using radio, similarly television, similarly internet, and all these facilities. But most of the cases, our schools are not doing that one. This is because of our efforts are not plenty to engage the schools, parents, teachers, and students in this pandemic situation. To engage them, we were not. I should say that we were not. Our efforts is not so effective. Despite all these things, and our teachers are using the virtual platforms, and they themselves have formed some ICT groups, and they carried out plenty of training activities. But these were unplanned. These were not planned. And later on, we tried to engage them, and we were not used, from face-to-face to virtual mode. This is because of generation gap. This is not only technological issue. We have big generation gap between the teachers and student. Students are from the millennials group, and teachers are from X generation and something like that. So that made us difficult, to use the technology, to use the different strategies to cope with the situation. And then, of course, there was a technical staff and resources, and student learning were mostly affected because we were used to carry out the student assessment only in a paper pencil test. We were not used to carry out different modalities under the assessment system, although there were several. And because of all these, our exams were postponed and we were not able to assess the student learning in a timely manner. The same thing was happening for grade 12 examination. Now the CCMC, which is coordinating all efforts against the COVID-19, allowed us to move ahead, and National Examination Board has published a notice for grade 12 examination. I hope you all know about it. There are, in the conclusion, I should say that there are some efforts going on, but which are not adequate and enough to address the needs of this pandemic situation. So what the next one is, this is the generation gap. I think you can see our teachers are from the, in terms of age group, our teachers are mostly from Generation X, and students are from the Generation Z. I mean, if we see Generation Z, which are age 22 and honor, these are called as those who are born after 1995. Let's say that. I mean, this is a big question. You know, until and unless our teachers, the X generation, will not be familiar with the latest technologies, there always will be a difficult. Like say, I prefer to read the newspaper in a hard printed version, but many more young people, they prefer to study the newspaper in the online. That's the way we should be used to handle the situation. So it may take time, but there is no any other options rather than training ourselves, accommodating ourselves in the new situation. And this is the generation, the key strategies, key strategies for educational planning in crisis situation. Basically, I'm talking from Nepal's perspective. That we have faced, our generation have faced two crises. In 2015 earthquake, there was a big crisis at that time, and this COVID-19 is another crisis. You know, the key strategies, what we should adopt is we should have a mechanism to carry out to assess the risk. This should be continuous, not at a time. Like say that there are flood situation and schools, the casualties are happening. I mean, we need to develop such screening of the situation, and we need to operational framework. We don't, we need up to date. The situation till now, what happened? You know, once the crisis is there, then we started to work to prepare the guideline and all these things. Then the third important thing is that how can we develop awareness our people, even in this pandemic situation, you know, that the many more people are, you know, they themselves are talking about, thinking about there is no COVID at all in the market. But, you know, using mask and other basic things we have not followed. So if we ask them at a time, no, we should orient people, and we should orient them from today. So that may work. I mean, crisis may appear in any time. This is an unwanted, undeclared event. So we should have such awareness, continuous awareness to engage our people. Then we must have baseline information. Even at today, we do not have, sorry to say that, we do not have information on how many students are connected with the latest technology, this internet connectivity. How many students and teachers are connecting themselves in the latest technology. I mean, we are always talking about the gross figure in an average figure. For the planning, average figure may not work. So we need to prepare, we need to work to prepare the baseline information. Then we can revitalizing the education system. I mean, even we were not clear in the beginning, you know, the COVID will be ended, then we will start our educational activities. No, these two pandemic, you know, taught basically for me as a bureaucrat, you know, the pandemic may go longer period, meaning that the educational activities should not be stopped. We should have alternative modalities to to engage the education. Recently, we had a flood in Melamsi. I mean, the flood, nobody knows when will it happen in another place, meaning that we cannot stop the things. We cannot stop the education activities. We should have a strategy to continue it together with the other interventions. The pandemic taught us we need a public institution, the strong public institution. We have realized that strong public institutions can provide, can be a public to everybody. So that is the message we need to we have learned from the past and from this COVID, and we need to work for that. And capacity is another issue, and networking. Of course, even the networking can help the people to develop resilient capacity, and then what is happening in other places, what is happening in nearby schools, or what strategies are being carried out in another school. Then that demands the coordination and collaboration. And we also need to have some sort of flexible learning modalities. This is multi-grade, multi-level, and all these things. And at the end, I think we should be careful, very careful about the equity, because the pandemic is more worse than the the poorer group than the richer one, because poorer are already disadvantaged from the situation. The pandemic may add more components, more burdens to them. So from the beginning, we should think about the equity concerns. These are some of the strategies we should think in the crisis situation when we plan to education. And the next one is what Bikash, please, next one. Bikash, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Just a second.
Yeah. Yes. Then best ways we should think about. During crisis, we can do something else, and after crisis, we need a clear picture about this. During crisis, we should think that state never sleep. I think we public institutions should work. I mean, this is not a holiday for for the public institutions. I mean, we should engage people. We should have contact with the people. Then we should use the precaution measure. Even during the pandemic, during this COVID situation, I mean, the lockdown, it was for the people, and the state machineries were not in lockdown. They have worked together. So public institutions should be allowed to work together and all these things. And how can we develop the resilience? How can we convince people that tomorrow will be the better day than today? I mean, that hope is also necessary. Then we need to mobilize the group. And during the crisis situation, this is this may happen at any time. Then we should have some thinking, and the lead should be taken by the public institute. Then they can have a cooperation with the group at all. After crisis, first we need assessment. Then we need to be careful about the safety. Now our schools are eager to open the school. I mean, some of the authorities are, head teacher and school management committees are eager to open the schools. Without assessing the situation, that should not be done. Only face-to-face is not a mode. There are different modes. We should also think then action as part of the priority. I mean, these are the necessary basic things. And how can we start the education? It does not mean that opening a school. How can we start the teaching learning activities? It could be more. How can we, engage the student and teacher, or let's say that how can we establish the connection between teacher and students during the pandemic? Is the most important things, and that should be continued. Once pandemic is over or crisis is over, then we can go into the normal situation. But during the crisis situation also, as a public, as a working in a state machineries, we should have the bad experience I have learned this time is that the school in Kathmandu, they have declared as holidays rather than contacting teachers or parents, or this could be the weak monitoring from outside, but it does not mean that the public institutions should do should not do anything during the pandemic. That is the we should work continuously, and we should also plan for the future. I mean, who are we? I mean, at the local level, local government, provincial level, provincial government, and central level, government of Nepal. Even school can be a unit. You know, during the pandemic, what this COVID, what I have learned, what I have seen in Kathmandu, they have called students in a outdress. I mean, that's not the, without assessing the situation, we should not ask. We should, my request is that this, face-to-face is not only one mode, but in without assessing, we should not ask students to come into schools. But rather, we should counsel them. There could be a, turn to ask the teachers can themselves went to the community, like in Tono, Abu Khairani. I mean, this is in Khairani, one school. What a teacher has done, he has sent the teachers to the community to counsel the students and parents during the COVID-19. I mean, there are different ways we can learn. Then last slide, I do have one best success stories. Then I will. You can get many more things in the slides. I will share you one story from the earthquake, situation. There was a big rumor. Nobody knows when another earthquake will be there, and there was a examination, postponement of the examination earlier. Once, I mean, the earthquake second wave was happened, then we discussed about starting the grade 12 examination. Then we planned for a date, but there was a big, resistance from the people to postpone the exam. Their argument was that our children cannot go into the second floor. Our plan was that students should be kept into the ground floor or even in the but later on we find out there were some hostel management groups. Their hostels was not were not maintained. They were in the front line to oppose the government decision. Then when we started exam in the ground floor, normal situation. Once starting school does mean that, there were buses in the street and shops were open. I mean, all these things can happen. So this is the one big story I learned, but we need to assess the situation first and take the strategies accordingly. Then the thing is that at the local level and at every level, we can form a group. There should be a public, school can coordinate for that. Then we need to allocate the responsibilities, and then prioritization, and get support from the network. Sometimes message communication could be the best ways, and stopping the havoc. This fake news. We should also explore the resources. And these are some of the stories and what we have learned, we have gained from basically these two crises. And this is my sharing. And I hope that if you have any concerns or experience, you have written in the chat box. And by saying so, thank you very much. And I will back mic to the Psyche.
Thank you very much, Hari sir, and thank you, Hari, for giving us that very good sort of government overview. And I'd like to just start by thanking Nelta, Bika sir, and British Council, Vaishali madam, and all your teams for organising this webinar. And I can see that we've got more than 100 participants, which I think is fantastic. So thank you very much for welcoming me. And Hari sir, thanks for that really good overview. What I would like to do is to drill down from the bigger picture to the school picture. I know many of you who are attending this webinar are teachers. So I really want to have a look at
what does education planning during crisis and after crisis mean for teachers? And in the research that I've done so far with the kind help of Tirtasa and his colleagues at Kawasoti Municipality, and I think Tirta's here today as well, so that's great. That there are 3 areas that we need to take stock of when the schools reopen. With the kids coming back and school starting, the most obvious place to start is to look at their learning. And those pink arrows you can see on the slide, there are 2 aspects of learning that teachers need to assess, especially with the young learners. So if you're teaching kindergarten to grade 5, very much so to assess how much of what they learned before COVID, before the crisis, have they forgotten? Because retention with the young learners is a really big problem. We're finding that many kids coming back to school have forgotten how to read when they could read before the lockdown. So the first set of pink arrows is how much have they forgotten and how much have they retained, and how can we stop them losing more? And the second set of arrows below that are, did they learn anything during lockdown online or through the print materials or through self-study of their textbooks? So how much was learned of that home learning? How much was actually achieved and how much was not learned? If we are realistic and we say maybe 20% of students were able to learn online, maybe another 10 or 15% effectively with print materials and at home, but probably 50% didn't achieve much in the lockdown period. So that's really where the focus of teachers is to look at the learning. But I think it's important also to look at the other 2 bubbles that you can see on the screen. The first one is about socialization. What behaviors have they forgotten, or are they practicing in a wrong way or in a good way when they come back to school? Maybe children have been really isolated, and it's the teacher's job to look for signs of mental health, maybe depression, or kids behaving in an antisocial way, or just overexcited about being back and meeting their friends. We'll see that exuberance and a lot of happiness too about being back in school.
But we have to look for signs of psychosocial issues as well, which are the result of being isolated at home, perhaps from a domestic violence point of view at home, being locked in, perhaps from a poverty point of view, having less resources than before the pandemic. So these are all the points on the socialization, taking stock. And finally, the taking stock of potential is a much bigger problem. We've physically lost 7 months of school, but that translates into, for the higher grades, for students going on into employment or students going on to higher education, that has severely reduced their employment chances. So for the older, adolescent and older children, there's a loss of employment that we really have to keep in mind. And also for adolescent girls who have maybe been married off earlier than normal because the household couldn't afford to keep them during lockdown, their loss of potential in learning affects their whole life as well. So under those 3 umbrellas, I'd like to now look a little bit more about how we can take stock of learning. So Sudarshan, next slide, please. Thanks. This diagram shows whether children have been included or excluded during the pandemic. There are 3 main factors. There's the factors at home, there's the factors at school, and there are the digital factors of whether children were able to access learning online. If you look at the intersection of those three bubbles, that the darkest pink area, small triangle, right in the middle of this diagram, there we find the children and the students who have been totally included during the pandemic and the school closures. But most children are not sitting in the middle of this diagram, and some of them are in the white space outside the diagram completely. Those are the most excluded children. They were probably excluded, or what we would say in a vulnerable or disadvantaged group before COVID-19. But COVID-19 has pushed them further from the center as a result. If we take a negative reading of all the points in this box, let's just have a quick look at that. I don't want to be too gloomy or pessimistic, but let's just do a negative reading. If we look at the home factors, the ones at the top, in a negative way, that, for example, the locality is far from the school, in a remote place where there is difficult communication by road or by transport, where the home language is not the medium of instruction in school. So where the language at home is Taru or Maga and not Nepali and not English. Where it's a girl child rather than a boy child, in a home where the social status and the income is an ethnic minority and a low income, and where parental education is not really existent, where parents or guardians are not literate themselves, are not educated themselves, and where there's no room to study or no support with any digital or any brother or sister or neighbor who can support learning. That would be the most negative reading of the home bubble. The most negative reading of the school bubble would be where the curriculum is not addressed in terms of competencies, but it's just covering page 57, covering page 58, covering the book, staying in school for the school year. That is considered the curriculum and the achievement. Where there aren't task-based materials, where it's all lecture, talk and chalk, teacher at the front of the class, talk, 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 no task-based materials. Where the different abilities in the class are not catered to, just the teacher teaches to the best 10 students at the front of the class and everyone sitting behind is forgotten. And where there is no ongoing assessment, no assessment of real needs, no assessment of progress, but simply paper and pen test at the end of the year. That would be the negative reading of the school. And the negative reading of the online or digital bubble would be no devices, no radio, no smartphone, no computer, no internet, no online classes, and no skills to use that equipment. Now, there are some children who on every single one of those points has a negative reading. They are the furthest excluded. They're what we call the furthest behind. And there are other children who have most of those things positive. They're in the middle of this diagram. Now, you as teachers, just as you're looking at this screen now, just think of your own students and put some little crosses in your mind on this screen. Where are your students? Did they have a good home school experience? So they had good print materials. They were able to do some home learning from visits from you as a teacher, and with print materials, they'll be on the right of this diagram. Or maybe they had a lot of home support and a lot of digital connectivity, and they did self-study and they went online and used the YouTube videos for learning. They would be on the home online left-hand side of the screen. But some of you will put some little crosses of your students who are outside the diagram, who have a nice, a safe home environment, but not the online or the school support. So just think for a moment, where would you place your students as a quick diagnosis?
Sudarshan, next slide, please. And thinking about those students, I think you've got three choices. And I'd like you, as I'm talking, to think, where are you as a teacher? Are you going to do business as usual, or a quick textbook coverage, or are you going to do a competency-based catch-up program? So let's look at business as usual. The business as usual model means that you just continue. Like Harry said, that sort of was like an extended holiday, and now we're back after our extended holiday, and we just start the school year with the new school curriculum and the new textbook, and we just go from there. There's quite a lot of pressure to do that. First of all, it's sort of on the surface the easiest way, because we can at least get through the next school year coming. I think a lot of teachers are probably in the middle bubble, which is the quick textbook-based coverage model. So not being as cynical as to say, well, just carry on and forget what happened. From parents or from colleagues or the department and the school, to quickly cover what was missed. And so the way that you do that is to race through the missing pages. And this attitude is common in most countries. The idea that by covering the page, you've somehow achieved the learning. It's a microcosm philosophy of the macrocosm of the macro model is, if the student sits in school for 12 grade years, from kindergarten or from grade 1 through grade 12, then by sitting in school for 12 years, they have achieved secondary education. The same idea is, by covering the pages in the book, my learners have achieved that grade, that subject. Unfortunately, that's not how learning works. I think parents can be satisfied with that. My teacher covered the book. I think there's a lot of pressure in school to cover the book. But is that really about learning? And in this emergency situation, I would argue that is not what you should be doing. I would argue that what you need to do is a competency-based catch-up program. Competency-based means looking at the real skills that the children have lost or the children have not learned, and then catching it up. Now, competency-based catch-up programs are often referred to, if you do more research on this, as ALP. That means accelerated learning programs. And I'd like to have a quick look at what, if you choose bubble 3, competency-based catch-up, this is what I'm going to do when I go back to my class. Then let's have a quick look and see what that means. Sudarshan, next slide, please. A bit of a complicated diagram, but look at the bottom of the slide, and the entry point is a placement test. At the end of my presentation, I want us to look at alternative placement tests. I don't think your placement test has to be a pen and paper, multiple choice, well thought out scientific test. You might not have those resources, and you might not have the time to develop it. There may be existing tests. So there are the national EGRA or other reading and basic maths tests that are international that you could access and use, especially with undergrade 5, to find out how much reading literacy and how much numeracy they've lost. You might have the test from the year before to give them, or you might take parts of last year's tests and parts of this year's end of test and put it together. There are various ways of making a placement test, but through the placement test, you identify the needs of the class and you map those needs to the curriculum. And from identifying the needs and mapping the needs and designing the program, that's how you get your accelerated learning program. Okay, But the problem is, you've not only got to do this catch up, you've also got to start teaching the new year. So you've got 2 sets of learning. And if you're not careful, you're going to totally overload students who are not used to learning. They've just had 7 months off. So you've got to add the previous core competencies they've missed to the current or this year's core competencies that they also need. So both groups of competencies have to be reduced to fit into 1 year. You can't overload your students or they're going to all drop out. They're all going to fall behind. So that process takes a lot of confidence. You've got to be able to tell your head teacher, your head of department, your parents, we're not going to learn page 57 and 58 because they're not central to the skills the students need. But we are going to learn page 43 from last year and page 92 from this year, because that's what my students need. So this takes quite a lot of confidence to eliminate what's not necessary and include what we would say is a core competency that must be learned. Not to complete the year in terms of time, but to complete the year in terms of achievement. And there are 2 ways of doing it. You can do it within the school timetable, or you can do it outside the school timetable. The temptation is to do it outside the timetable. That's the cog, the purple cog at the top of the diagram. Timetable the accelerated learning program outside school hours, like at the weekends or in the evenings or before school or staying after school or in different shifts. But if you do that, you're probably going to exclude all the children who were most excluded from my previous diagram in the first place. Exactly the children who can't come before school or after school because they're helping with the home farm or the home business. Exactly those children that you want to target won't be able to come outside school hours. So that might be a counterproductive step. Although there are possibilities during holidays, or there are ways of timetabling this that schools know much better than I do how to do that. But I would argue for the middle cog where it says timetable within the school hours. And what I would work from the premise that the more homework you give, the more exclusive you're going to be, the more the disadvantaged kids are going to lose out. So try to do everything that you want to give as homework, try to do it in class. The most inclusive school model is without homework. It's saying that all children are equal in the learning environment here, and we can timetable self-study hours into the school timetable, but we don't let them do that at home because that's where the problem lies. But what this requires is methodology from teachers and what we would call 2-tier tasks, so that there are advantaged learners in your class who benefited from online teaching during COVID closures and who have the support of the parents and they know how to do the maths problem. They know the English target piece of language that you're teaching that day. They know the science experiment. They know it. And there are other kids in the class who don't. So I think it's a question of methodology as well as getting this reduced curriculum. It's a question of you as teachers with your methodology to manage what we call 2-tiered tasks. A tier is like on the wedding cake. So there's the higher tier at the top of the wedding cake and the big tier, the main part of the wedding cake. Okay, so all students need to know the main part, and then the stronger students can go to a second task. And so it's about designing activities in class that have part 1 and part 2. You work with the most vulnerable learners and the average learners to make sure everyone achieves part 1 of the task. And quietly, the stronger learners can go on and learn the second while they're waiting for everybody else to finish the first task. Another way of doing it is to have peer mentors, to put them in pairs, 1 strong student, 1 weak student. You've got to look at the psychology of your class. Very young children might not like that, and competitive exam taking children at the end of school also don't really like that, but maybe kids in the middle, the peer mentoring does work. You've got to judge it by your own class's needs. And you might look at getting additional classroom support using volunteers, using local NGOs, using willing parents to come in and help you and support you in the classroom. There are a lot of informal models where additional classroom support in emergencies has been used, but it depends very much on your school management committee and what the school will allow. Next slide, Sudarshan, please. I've just got some, I'm not going to go through these, I just wanted to show them to you, but this is an example of national curriculum, the national curriculum of Qatar, which I worked on. We did maths, science, curriculum competencies from the Qatar national curriculum, and I just wanted to show you what's a core competency. So can you see on the left, the 5.4 is in dark blue. That shows you it's a core competency, and 5.5 is not in a blue box. That says it's an additional or a higher task competency. So this is what we mean by core competencies. So this is taken from grade 6, and it's checking that they know the simple present tense. So the core competency is the first one, that they can use sentences like water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, or the sun always rises. Facts, which use the simple present tense, and they can use simple present with the sensory verbs. It smells good, it tastes good, she looks beautiful, he looks handsome, which I'm sure you all do today. So those are the core competencies, and the additional competencies are, can we do the simple present with the time phrases? Now, looking at those three in the past as well as the present, and the third one is how often questions with the present. Now, just ask yourself, if you are an English teacher, of those three additional competencies, which one would you choose? Which one would you leave out? This is where I want you just to get a feeling for, you've got to be critical. You've got to have the confidence to leave some things out. So of those three things, which one would you throw away because you don't have time? That's the sort of thinking you've got to think. 5.4 is my core competency, 5.5 is my additional. Even within the additional, I don't have time to do them all. Which one do I choose? Next slide, Sudarshan. Just that's showing you the same thing with maths competencies. There's the additional 1, 3.2 that you can throw away, but even 2.1 through 2.4, you've got to think, which ones would I prioritize? We don't have time to go into that. So let's look at the next one, Sudarshan. The same thing with the science core competencies.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. It seems that your voice is breaking. Would you like to switch off your camera? That might help.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any better? Is that any better?
Yes.
So. Okay.
Yes.
So we might have science teachers or maths teachers in the room. So that's also showing you how these competencies are written. Now, I know from looking at the Nepal government CDC competencies, they're not written in this same way, with the actual competency and the examples. And this is something that in the future you might think about, is how to write a core competency curriculum with the core competencies highlighted, with examples given, and not necessarily linked so closely to the textbooks. Next slide, Sudarshan. So what I'd like to talk about finally, because this drills right down into what can you do as classroom teachers, I want to show you a different approach to placement testing. Now, I know you can't read that script on the screen. That's Tamil. but it gives you a good example of, imagine that's mother tongue for some children and not mother tongue for others. Or imagine that's Nepali for children who don't read Nepali. So you can use multilingual in your placement testing. We're going to do that today just to show you. It doesn't matter that you can't read the Tamil. Okay, so from this placement test, I want to show you a few things. The first thing is it's visual. It could be done as an oral test. Those of you who are familiar with English language testing, where you test groups of students, this is actually a game. You roll a dice. It's a keep talking game. You roll a dice or you spin a counter, you score 5, and you move your counter to 5 squares along, and you tell about what she's doing in that square. Or people playing the game ask you a question. What does she do at 6 o'clock in the morning? And you reply, she feeds the chickens. Okay? So it can be done as a game with groups of students, but it could equally be done with pen and paper if you wanted to do it as a written test with a series of questions. So there's a lot of flexibility, but the core issue is it's visual. It could be auditory, it could be reading and writing, and it could be kinesthetic, playing it as a game. It could be done in groups, it could be done individually. You need to think about that kind of flexibility because we're emphasizing learner-centeredness. Through doing that, playing it as a game and involving visual and kinesthetic, we are also looking at how well the learners have adjusted their behaviors to being back in school. Are they listening to each other? So if we go back right to my first diagram, how is their socialization? We can also measure that with this test. If this is an English test, then you would put the cues in Nepali and get them to speak in English, or you'd put no cues and just have the time and the picture and get them to speak in English. Lots of things you could do with it. Question and answer. What time does she get up? What time does she feed the chickens? What time does she do the washing? What time does she fetch the water? You could do how many questions? How many meals does she prepare per day? How many people does she see? How many tasks does she do? So you can do how many questions. And you can just tell her routine. She gets up at 4 o'clock. First she sweeps the verandas. Then she prepares breakfast. After that she feeds the chickens. So you could just do it as a sequence. You could do it as a chain game. You tell the first square, then you tell the first square, and then she gets up at 4. She gets up at 4 and sweeps. She gets up at 4, she sweeps. She prepares the breakfast. So there's lots of things you can do with this as an English language teacher. But let's say you're a Nepali teacher, okay? So let's say where you see the Tamil, that's mother tongue. And so the first thing they have to do is label the squares in Nepali. Or if label the squares in English if the script is. So whatever language you put into this, you can do a labeling exercise to test how much writing and how much of the characters and the script and the spelling that they've retained. If it's higher, grade 6 to grade 10, you can do different types of writing depending on the level. So the simplest level, it could be a factual account. At this time she does that, then she does this. It could just be the story. But it could be a more critical thinking account. She spends the following amount of time outdoors in outdoor activities and the following amount of time in indoors. She's quite isolated. She doesn't see a lot of people. You could look at the positive and negative factors of her day, right? If it's maths, it could be draw the clocks if it's grade 2. You see, look at the time and draw the clock for each activity. It could be tell the time. It could be calculate how many hours she spends outdoors, how many hours she spends indoors. It could be counting. There are many things you can count in this picture. If it's science and the environment, if you're a science teacher, you could ask which tasks involve measurement that you can see. which tasks involve volume, force, temperature, electricity, light. So you could use the same thing for science, for maths, for Nepali, for English. So my first point is, one rich resource serves many, many purposes. Finally, it can be also used for core skills and critical thinking at the higher grades. You can say, this girl was forced into early marriage because of the COVID pandemic. Is her work paid or unpaid? Is she valued? Does she see her friends? Does she go to school? Is she interacting enough with others to reach her potential? Do boys have to do the same thing? Why? Why not? Has COVID made the situation worse for girls? And finally, the thing you want the students to think of, how can we help girls like this? So there's a lot of core skills and critical thinking here as well in your placement testing. Last slide, Sudarshan, because I've run out of time, please. Sudarshan, can we have the last slide? Can I have the one before that, Sudarshan, please? Yes, thank you. Just to sum up, we haven't had time to talk about these things, but these are the things that we'll be looking at in Kawasoti municipality. We'll be looking at using the EMIS data for the placement testing and to identifying the furthest behind the most vulnerable. We'll look at additional competency-based core curriculum and develop that, task-based materials. We'll look at the assessment system and how can that be approved for more crisis-sensitive management in the future. We'll look at the learner-centered methodology, including online methodology. And finally, very, very importantly, we've got to get the buy-in, the support of the parents and the head teachers in the school management committee, as well as the municipality. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you both presenters. It was so wonderful to hear you. Thank you, Hari sir and Saiki, for the wonderful presentation. We have received many questions, and I'll take some of them. Presenters, you can decide who is going to answer the question. And the first question is asked by Tilman Tamang and Tara Gautam. And the question is like, how can we teach effectively to our students who are not under the online access? You can answer this question relating to the planning phase.
Saiki, can I add first, because I am government bureaucrats, probably most questions may be directed to me.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, then from your experience, international perspectives, you could add later on. Thank you for the questions. I have also written in my notebook, there are 5 questions relating to either one or another way. I mean, we know that we do not have online access to all students and schools. Therefore, we have in our directives, we have categorized into 5 different groups. Online, those groups who have online access is 5th one in Nepal's context. So we prefer to use the online if there are. If not, then we should go to the other options. But the question on how can we teach effectively in online class, I'm not expert in this area, probably Saiki add more on it. But my request to all of you is that please see the guideline at once. Then there are, I mean, depending upon the availability of the facilities, and we should analyze ourselves. Every school should analyze themselves, and they need to position them where do they fall out of these 5 categories? Then they need to work accordingly. In the remote areas, if there are not online access, it does not mean that we should not have contact with the student. Let me have one example sharing from Nigeria. One of my colleagues who is working in BSO International, he has shared earlier, in Nigeria, they have brought the concept of community board. I mean, this is a blackboard, something like that. In every community, they have placed a board, and teachers went there, and then they have written the lessons or some homework or something by the teachers. Then students go turn by turn and write in the paper and come back to their home and do the things accordingly. I mean, there are so many things we can do. We need to explore them. But under the online, how can we make it effective? This is my beyond my area. Sorry to say that I could not address that question. Saiki, could you?
Yes. I think maybe 3 things to add, Hadisa. There's an interesting World Bank study about using SMS and phone calls for maths. They had quite a big success. Their baseline study showed that 70% people had basic telephones, but not so much of the other equipment. So they sent maths problems. They even did their placement test with 5 questions on SMS. But they found that if it's SMS only with no phone call follow-up from the teacher, it was not successful. But in combination with the phone calls, it was quite a success. Over, I think, a 5-month period, it cost about $20 per student. I mean, that's money that central government would probably have to find. But we have seen SMS with phone call follow-up on simple, the most basic telephones. We've seen that in many places of the world. There was a very successful program with British Council in Rwanda using the same technology. And where the SIM card was not even online. It's like a little SIM card that you put into the phone, and then the program's inside there. So I think there are other technologies to explore, and that we shouldn't have this stark divide between online Zoom classes and print material classes, and we should examine what's in between. I think the British Council also has some good success stories with their current radio broadcasts with follow-up by SMS. So I think these are areas we should really explore. And in terms of the online teaching, I think that we need to do more training, both with learners, what we call learner training, how they can get the most out of Zoom, what they should do when they're put into a breakout room. But we can do a lot more training with the teachers. So, for example, Zoom doesn't support the Nepali script when you use the whiteboard, but you can use a blank Word document as long as you've got the font on your computer and type things like a whiteboard. You can make things appear and disappear using the undo buttons in Word. We've experimented a lot with that with my work in Sri Lanka, where we suddenly had to go online. We knew how to use Zoom, but we really weren't using it to its best advantage because of the scripts, different Sinhalese and Tamil scripts. That's the same with Nepali script. So I think further training in how to use the tools within Zoom, what's the optimum time to put kids into breakout rooms? How do you monitor them in the breakout room? What are the types of tasks you use? That's the sort of area where we can give more online training to both teachers and learner training to learners. Thank you.
Thank you for the comprehensive answer. We have another questions, and I think Hari sir has already responded in chat box, but I think it is good to bring that question in front of all participants so that they could be benefited. And the question is from Helen. currently there seems to be a power struggle between CDOs and the mayors and the schools over reopening. Even when there are a few cases from CDOs are obstructing schools opening, not being agreed school reopening plan. What plan does MOEST have to resolve this situation? So, Hari sir, would you
Yeah,
like
thank you. Thank you, Bikash ji. I think I need to respond 2-3 questions at a time. And I have already responded about this conflict.
specific as well? Okay,
Yeah,
we are running.
specifically, Helen Sherpa was asking about this conflict between the CDU and mayor. My request is that follow the instruction issued by authorities. I mean, there is a DCMC at the district level. I mean, these all people are also genuine. They will follow the instruction from the CCMC. We should not put big pressure to open from our opinion. I mean, we should make a decision from the authorities because the health issue is the biggest one. We should use the alternative modalities. Recently, Ministry of Education has worked with the CCMC and we have issued, action plan, which in terms of coloring amber, yellow, and green color, and which activities can be done under these different 3 colors. These are already mentioned in the action plan, and that action plan that is in the ministry website, and CCMC will also has already instructed to the DCMC, and CDO has that action plan as well. Then make a decision based on the meeting where all stakeholders will be there at the district level. My request is that do not open school by yourself, by your decision. One colleague has asked about Kawaswati. Can we open school? I mean, I don't know about in which color you fall under these different 3 colors. If you are in green color, government has made a decision that you can open. But the Kawaswati, opening school in Kawaswati also belongs to the DCMC. Go to the CDO office. I mean, we can ask with the mayor, and there will be in the DCMC, different members are there, and they can make a decision. And the head teacher, SMC, PTA can also work with them and work as per the decision of the DCMC, not as per the decision of individual school. This is my request to Kawaswati school as well. And I must have responded one psychological trauma. I mean, psychologically, in order to counseling, we cannot say that everybody can counsel. In order to have a counseling, in order to carry out the counseling, we need a certified counseling. But in the community, what we can do, community leader can work and we can have some sort of, a common understanding about the issues. And community leader can work together, and we can work with the community leader. And as per the decision of the community, even in a small community, we can work towards for that. And third one is Dr. Pandey, Kasiraj Pandey sir, who is my colleague as well, has talked about the life skill and home learning project. I think schools can do it. My request is that let's see where do you fall. I mean, amber, yellow, or green. Then plan accordingly. You can ask, this is not normal situation. One colleague has asked, can you open school today? Once the cases are raised, increasing, then authorities may ask to close the schools. I mean, that maybe, we don't know. But we need to prepare ourselves. Only opening, only face-to-face is not the solution. We need to work. One class can be invited for a day. The next day, another class will come there. I mean, there could be different strategies. We can sit together at the community level, at the DCMC level, and we need to make a decision accordingly. My humble request to school is that let's do not make a single decision without consulting authorities in this pandemic COVID situation. I mean, other pandemic and this pandemic is very different one. That is my humble request to, and I mean, this is not normal one. This is not normal one, and we should follow the authority issues. Circular issued by the authorities. these are 2-3 questions I try to respond together. Let me share one example because it's just one. Where are we? We need to assess as well. Ministry of Education has a provision of CUG. I try to call head teacher as a sample basis. Even head teacher does not know when I call them about the CUG. Then we had a meeting with the telecommunication and NCEL, and we instructed, after the meeting, they also instructed to their respective offices, and now the user in the CUG is being increased. This is telephone conversation we can do. I mean, let's work in the pandemic situation collectively. Let's do not be so optimistic and nothing may happen in the pandemic. No, we should not go beyond the issue of the circular of the authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Hari sir. Actually, I was going to ask some other questions, but you responded. We had a question from Prakash Kesi and Hotraj Dungana and some other colleagues, but you have already responded them. Thank you so much. So now we are at the end of today's session. I'd like to thank all the participants for your active participation, I'd like to say, and I'd also like to thank Mr. Sudeep Neupane and the colleagues from British Council for collecting the participants' question, and our special thanks to both presenters. We are very grateful to Hari sir who accepted the request of NELTA, and I'd like to thank Saiki for your wonderful presentation. We'll send the link of recording and certificates in your email within a couple of days. And if you have not filled the feedback form yet, please fill the feedback form. And we are going to end the session. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and stay connected.